Good morning. My name is Colleen.
And I'm Niki, and we're so happy that you're here with us today. Here at 1128, our mission is to help people do life different by setting rhythms and values with Jesus at the center. And this morning, our prayer is that you will have a meaningful meeting with Jesus right where you are.
Now, we know and we recognize that this day can be hard for moms, for women, for many different reasons. And we also know this day can be a really joyful day, a joyful day of celebration and feeling thankful. And so we do want to take a moment to say Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers and mother figures in the room. Being a mom doesn't just look one certain way. And so we are thankful for you and for the role that you play in the lives of whether they're your own children or in children around you. And we also recognize the hurt, the sadness that might be in the room today. And we want you to know that you are seen and that we care. We care deeply. We really desire that this is a church that's a safe place. And so this message, this gathering, it's honestly, it's not about Mother's Day. It's a gathering and it's a message for all of us because it's a message about mercy.
And mercy is a word that we hear in church a lot, right? But maybe not so much in our everyday life. As a matter of fact, when we were going through this whole thing, I was trying to think of ways I actually use the word mercy. And I could really only come up from two things in my childhood. One was how I knew my mother was super mad at me was I would do something and she would look up to the sky, kind of roll her eyes up there, and she'd be like, "Lord, have mercy on me." And I knew I was in trouble. And then there's a game that we used to play where someone would pull your finger back as fast and as hard as they could, or bend your wrist back as fast and as hard as they could to get you to scream mercy. And you would scream mercy like you were screaming stop, right? But that's not really what mercy is. And sometimes we view it as forgiveness, but that's not necessarily an all-encompassing definition of mercy, because mercy is when you extend compassion, care, even forgiveness, but you have the power to hurt someone. And not so much that you have the power to hurt someone or to be rude to someone or be mean to someone, but you are justified in that right to hurt them.
Now, I was 16. My sister and I were running late for school. So we ran out of the house and we got into my car, but really the family car that sat in the driveway. And it was one of those mornings where the windshield was completely defrosted over. And I probably was because I knew we were already running late to pick up my friend so that we could get to school on time. My sister got in the back seat because we were picking up my friend. I got in the front seat and I'm trying as hard as I can to get this window to defrost faster, which I'm sure if you've done this, it doesn't work. It takes whatever time it takes to defrost. The other thing you need to know about my house is that I lived on a 4-lane road. There was two lanes, and a median in the middle, and the speed limit was 45 miles per hour. I lived on a very busy street. So I'm watching the windshield, I'm watching the minutes tick by, and I'm okay, we really gotta go. Do I think this is defrosted enough? Yes, I do. Okay, I'm gonna turn out onto the busy road. So I'm looking to my left, I'm making sure no one's coming. I turn out onto the road, and I realize that yes, I could see out of my windshield when I was sitting in my driveway facing one direction. But the second that I turned on this road, the sun that was rising was coming in directly through my windshield, making it impossible for me to see. I don't just mean you kind of can't see. I mean I could not see a thing. I could not see what I was doing. I could not see where I was going. So I did what any normal 16-year-old would do, and I just kept driving. And I mean, like, I wasn't just like crawling, because again, in my mind, I'm like, this is a busy road. Like, I got to get up to speed here. Within probably 15 seconds of being on the road, I slammed into the back of a car. And I just remember in the driver's seat thinking, what just happened? Like, what did I just do? And I got out of the car, probably sobbing, and I saw that there was a bus stopped in the other lane. And so in my lane, everybody was stopped for the bus, like they should have been, and I just ran into two cars. And I remember thinking, oh no, I have to call my dad. He's already left for work. He's gonna be so mad at me. Because I didn't just ruin like my car, I ruined another car and a third car ahead of it. So I called him. I said, like, Dad, you have to turn around. And so he turned around. And I was still afraid, like, okay, maybe he wouldn't be like mad at me in front of like all the people and the policemen and all that stuff. But like, you know, I was afraid it was gonna be that like, okay, like later though, we'll talk about this. But he hugged me. He took care of everything while my sister and I just stood in the median. He even offered to my sister and I, like, hey, do you guys just want to stay home from school? And we ended up going, and the whole day I just worried, like, okay, he wasn't mad at me there, but is he going to be mad at me at home? Is he going to make me pay for the whole entire car out of my savings? And I remember taking the bus home that day with all the freshmen and sophomores as I was a junior, and just thinking, oh, this is so terrible. Like, am I going to be grounded forever, miss out on all this fun? And I got home, and both of my parents, my mom and my dad, walked out of the house towards me, and I remember them handing me a book. And inside the book, they had written, like, we are proud of you. We all make mistakes, and it's okay.
You know, Colleen's dad had the right to punish her. She had actually told me when we were talking about this that this wasn't like the first fender bender.
It wasn't?
She didn't know I was going to tell you guys that.
No.
Surprise! But he would have been justified in having her pay for it out of her savings. He could have, you know, given her a whole lecturing, a whole talk, but he didn't. He chose in that moment to set aside the power and authority he had to punish her, to instead extend love. And he chose love over the consequence. And Colleen didn't necessarily deserve it. Remember the fender bender right before it, right? She didn't deserve it. And here's the thing though, Colleen isn't the only one that needed compassion that day. Because if we're real, like, we all mess up. We've all done things that we're not proud of, or meant to do things and didn't do them, or we've lied, we've cheated, we've misused people and things, we've been selfish at times. We've all hurt people. We've been hypocrites. I'm sure somebody in here probably this week told someone, I'm sick, I can't hang out, when really they just needed space, but they didn't want to say that. And we as people need mercy daily, and sometimes we're afraid to ask God for that mercy because there's something in us that knows we don't deserve it. But God is so big and so wonderful, and he knows, and he wants us to know that it's compassion, not consequences, that makes our story redeemable. I'm going to say that one more time. If you think that God is not big enough to forgive the one thing that you cannot forgive, I want you to know and understand today that through Jesus, he has forgiven everything. And he knows that it is compassion, not consequences, that makes your story redeemable.
Today, we're looking at one of my favorite books of the Bible. We're looking at the story of Ruth. Now, Ruth is a book of the Bible that's in the Old Testament, so before Jesus. And Ruth is one of two books of the Bible that's named after a woman. And if you're sitting there trying to think of the other one, it's Esther, okay? But Ruth and Esther, those are the only two books of the Bible that are named after women. So that first should get our attention. But then second, Ruth is the only book of the Bible, the only one in the entire Bible that's named after a non Jew. Now, this especially should get our attention because in the Old Testament, if you weren't God's people, if you weren't part of this, like, it was almost like this, like, group, you were known as, like, cursed, okay? So this book of the Bible is named after a cursed non-Jew, but it's this beautiful story of mercy. Beautiful story of mercy. And today we're going to look at chapter 1. And in chapter 1, it says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. Now, this book of the Bible, Ruth, takes place right after, or it comes right after the book of Judges in the Old Testament, but really, it's happening sometime during the book of Judges. Like, Ruth isn't after, it's during this. And in Judges, the Israelite people, God's chosen people, had just gotten into the promised land that had taken them 40 years of wandering to get into. So God's people are in this promised land, but they don't have a king. They don't have a ruler. And so it says in the book of Judges, like, kind of like, basically, people are doing what they want. Everyone was doing what they want, whatever they felt like, because there was no one ruling. And so this book takes place during this time period and in the promised land. And now there's a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judea, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. What's happening here is there's this man, and he's a Jew. He's one of the promised people. He's saying, oh no, like there's a famine. And he takes his family out of the promised land. Like, he leaves this promised land that it took him so many years to get into because there's this famine. And ultimately, what we see is like, he's trying to fix the problem. Like, he sees this problem. There's not enough food. Well, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to move my family to Moab. But here's the thing that you need to know about Moab. Like, Moab, if like the promised land was like this beautiful, like for God's chosen people, Moab was like the opposite. Moab was a city that was founded and built on sin and known for idolatry, so worshiping many gods. And then it was also known for sexual immorality. And so you didn't want to be known as a person from Moab, and the people, the Israelites, did not get along with them. If we continue, it says, now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. This is the first time that we see Ruth in this story. Now, we don't know a lot about who she was, where she was raised, what her life was like. But again, because she grew up in Moab, there would be things that were just assumed about her. There would be things that are like, well, even if it's not you, like you're so close to it that like that is you. And so she wouldn't be known as like a woman worthy of marrying either of these men, but they did. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. So she's preparing at this point with nothing. She's lost her husband. She's lost her 2 sons. Everything is gone. Her way of being provided for is gone. And she hears like, oh, God's taking care of the people back home. I'm going to go there. And so with her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judea.
So I always picture this next part of the story, like they're getting their things ready and they're about to leave, and Naomi has this like light bulb moment where she's like, wait, they can't come with me. What am I doing to them, right? So to get the stage going, okay, back in these days when you were a woman, your worth, your value, your provision, your security came solely from male leadership. So your husband, if your husband died, your sons, okay? These girls had lost their headship, essentially. So they didn't have anyone to depend on to take care of them. And Naomi pretty much tells them at this point, like, I'm old. I can't have more sons and you're going to wait for them to grow up and then marry them. I can't do anything for you. I can't provide anything for you. I can't help you. And knowing this, I'm sure she also knew that she would be bringing back 2 Moabite women who would probably be looked at a little crazy in the Jewish community, and they would have to go through oppression maybe, or, judgment, whatever. So she's trying to save them, and she says, no, it's not good for you to come with me. Go back to your family. So one can infer that they had something. They might have had brothers or a family member still alive, a male family member, and they have this back and forth. And it comes to where Orpah decides she is going to go back. And I think the point that pushed Orpah to do it is actually in verse 13, where Naomi said, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. And when she says this, when she acknowledges that they left the one true God to go pursue safety in the world, and she's acknowledging that I think that I'm having consequences because of this bad decision, and I don't want you to have to incur those. And this is where Orpah weeps, and she says, okay, I'm going to go back. But Ruth does this thing. She literally clings to her, and she says, no, I'm not going to go back. I'm not going to leave you. And she says more than I'm not going to leave you.
She says, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you will go, I will go, and where you will stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. This part, it's a turning point in her story. Because yes, she's making a commitment to Naomi and saying hey, I'm with you, but it's bigger than that. Your God will be my God. We don't know how much Ruth knows about Naomi's God, but in this statement, she's saying I trust your God. Ruth says, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. And Ruth goes with Naomi. This speech is kind of famous in the Bible. And yes, it is Ruth showing her commitment. But here, it's bigger than that. She even says, your people will be my people. Do you remember everything from the beginning? Do you remember how those groups of people were like oil and water? She knows, I won't fit in there. She knows she will be looked down upon, and she might have fear about it, but she doesn't let that fear stop her from saying, no, your people will be my people. She also knows that if she goes, she's going to be leaving everything. And like Niki said, if Naomi's telling her, go back to your family, we can guess that she has family, friends, somebody that would take care of her. And instead of going back, she's saying, no, I'm with you. I will leave all that behind and go with you. She is a cursed person who is going to live among God's people. Ruth also says, your God will be my God. Ruth won't let her past stop her, her fears stop her, because she trusts God. She's on this road. She doesn't know how her story's going to end. And part of the reason I love that we sang that song right before the message today, like, she has that deep trust already. She hasn't seen the ending, but she's standing in this moment and she's saying, your God will be my God. And I trust that even though I am a person, even if it's just by association, that I deserve all the consequences, I trust that you have a God of compassion. She's walking down this road and she could be walking into, even physical death. She doesn't know. But in this moment, your God will be my God. She is trusting deeply that Naomi's God, that our God is going to look out for her and have compassion on her. Ruth is trusting that God can rewrite, redeem, and restore her story and her life.
And I often think that maybe this is one of the reasons why the book is named after Ruth, because in that moment, she showed an even deeper faith than Naomi did. But some of us are living like Naomi this morning. We've experienced heartbreak, heartache, one loss after another. You feel like you're just going through the motions of life. Maybe you blame yourself for some of the things that you're going through. You want something more. You're working hard to try to provide for your family. It just seems like one thing after another just keeps hitting you. And you wonder, what am I supposed to do? The way forward doesn't seem clear. I don't know how I'm supposed to survive this. And for the Naomis here today, I want to remind you that you are not alone, and nothing that you have done, nothing that you blame yourself for can separate you from the love and care and compassion of God. And I know that there's also some Ruths here. As a matter of fact, I kind of relate a little bit to Ruth in this because she's had a life of struggle. And her story has its own losses and its own hardships, but maybe you've dealt with assumptions about you now because of who you were then. Maybe you've had people kind of give you the side eye. Like, I was actually telling Colleen this morning about when I was cleaning the administrative offices in prisons and how some of the admins would just look at me like I'm going to steal their mint off their desk or something, But maybe you carry around the judgments of people on you. Your story has its own loss and its own hardships. But no matter who you are today, no matter where you've come from, no matter what your struggle, your pain, God has compassion for you. He has mercy for you. Naomi returned to her people. And here's the beautiful thing. Like at the end of chapter 1, beginning of chapter 2, you can already see the compassion of God through his people to them. There's this point where Ruth goes out to glean the fields because the Israelites were instructed to leave gleanings behind for people. They were to care for the poor and the widows, right? So she goes out and she's picking up the stuff that's left over, and the owner of the field tells his workers that leave a little extra for her. Don't harm her. She's done a great thing, her commitment to Naomi. So this was God committing to her to take care of her through the people of God. And today, some of you need to be reminded of that. Some of you need to return to God this morning. And others of you need to trust that God is able, willing to take care for you. Even when we've done bad things, that he still loves you and he forgives you like he forgave Naomi and welcomed her back. And that, like Ruth, you are not an outsider in his mind. You are the apple of his eye. You are sons and daughters of the Most High King.
If we're going to live differently, if we're going to do life different, like we say each week from up here, we have to turn to God first. Now, I know some people, some Christians, some Christian pastors too, they'll say like, oh, just give it to God. Oh, just turn to God. And I know that can sound sometimes like really like, okay, like what does that mean? And that's way easier said than done. Or maybe that's easier for you, but what does that even look like? But what I mean is we have to turn to God first. It means that when we see this problem ahead of us and we think to ourselves like, okay, like I can just do X, Y, and Z and then I can fix it all on my own. It means instead of going into fix it mode, we pause. We pause first. We pause and maybe we don't even have words, but we just say like, God, help. Or maybe there are some of us that feel so weighted down by our past. And we feel like every time we try to come out of it, we just feel like we're going under a little bit more. And we have those thoughts that spiral and we convince ourselves that like we're terrible or we're this or we're that or we should have done this differently. And instead, it's pausing. It's pausing and looking at God before anything else. We don't have to have the right words. We don't have to say the right things. We just need to have that pause. That pause before we go try to fix things or we jump off the deep end because we're thinking about all these things. It's also sometimes praying very specifically for God's peace. I don't know about you, but that is one thing that when I pray for, and it's not like immediate or like a magic thing. It's not at all like that. But there are these moments where I have peace that the world could never have given me. Where it's like this terrible moment or I feel like I'm in a terrible spot. But God provides peace that is nothing. It's like nothing else of this world. This morning, we acknowledge that both for Naomi and Ruth, for us, for all of us, that God could have said, like, no, you're going to have consequences. And this is what your consequence is, just like my dad. We acknowledge that the consequence for our imperfect, sin-filled lives is really death. And we acknowledge that the curse of death is not something that we can avoid on our own or fix on our own. And we acknowledge that although we try really hard, we on our own will always fall short. But this morning, we also acknowledge and we believe that God is a God who wants to redeem our stories. We believe that the Son of God, that Jesus was filled with compassion, filled with mercy for us, for all of us. That Jesus took our place, broke the curse, and because of that, we are offered this redeemed story, this new life, this way of doing it differently. When we choose this way forward, when we choose the way forward of pausing and looking to God before anything else, it will change our life. And when we choose God's way, our family will notice. When we choose God's way, the people we spend time with the most, they're going to see it and they will be affected as well. And when we understand that we're redeemed because of compassion and not these consequences, we ultimately live as more compassionate people too. I mean, my dad's compassion, that very tangible compassion, it changed me that day. And it's something that I will never forget. Compassion, it changes lives. Compassion changes families. Compassion and not the consequences is what changes your world. Let's pray. God, you love us so much. You love us. And even when we don't deserve it, and even because, or even though we don't deserve it, you desire to pour your compassion out on us. There is nothing that can separate us from your love, and for that we are so, so grateful. God, thank you for Naomi and Ruth, and that we get to read about them, and that we get to see Ruth's trust in you even before she can see the end. And even though we doubt and we fear, help us be people that are like Ruth, that trust you deeply, that trust you so deeply that we don't know what the end's going to be, but we know that you are good and that you are compassionate and that you are with us. God, this morning we pause and we look to you. Help us do that in the good and in the bad. Help us remember that you love us and you desire a relationship with us. And help us pause and be in relationship with you. We thank you for who you are and that you are a God of compassion and comfort and peace. And please fill that space now. God, be with us today and as we go through the week. We're so thankful for you. Amen.